Okay, so get this. Researchers are teaching robots to imagine the future.
Hmm.
You know, like how we play out different scenarios in our heads before making a decision.
Right.
Well, now robots are doing that too, but in a much more advanced way.
Yeah.
And it's all thanks to this new system called EnerVerse.
It's really fascinating stuff.
You sent over this research paper, and we are going to break it all down for our listeners.
Awesome.
How it works, why it's such a big deal, and what it might mean for, well, everything.
It really could change everything.
Think self-driving cars that can avoid accidents before they even happen.
Wow.
Or robots in your home that can, like, figure out how to clean without bumping into things.
It's not science fiction anymore.
So what's so exciting about EnerVerse is that it's not some far-off concept.
Right. It's a real system being tested right now.
And it's already showing some amazing results.
Oh, yeah. The results are incredible.
So let's talk about the problem EnerVerse is trying to solve.
Okay.
Robots are great at following instructions, but the real world is full of surprises. So how do you prepare a robot for that?
Right. That's where traditional robots have really struggled.
They just weren't designed for that.
Think of it this way. They're like actors who can only follow a script.
Okay, I like that analogy.
They're great if everything goes exactly as planned.
Right. They hit their marks.
But if something unexpected happens,
Uh-oh.
they don't know what to do.
So it sounds like EnerVerse is like giving these robots improv skills.
Exactly. It's giving them the ability to think on their feet and adapt to changing circumstances.
So they can go off script.
And it does this by using a few really clever tricks.
The paper mentions this chunk-wise autoregressive diffusion.
Right.
Honestly, it sounds a bit intimidating.
It is a mouthful, but the idea is actually pretty simple.
Okay, good.
Imagine the AI is watching a movie.
Okay.
It learns to predict what will happen next based on the previous scenes.
Interesting.
But instead of just predicting flat images,
Right.
EnerVerse is generating full 3D simulations broken down into these short chunks of time.
So it's like predicting the future one short scene at a time.
Exactly.
But to predict the future accurately, wouldn't the AI need to understand the environment from different angles?
That's a great question.
Not just one perspective.
You're absolutely right.
I mean, we do that right.
And that's where EnerVerse's use of free Anchor or FAV space comes in.
FAV space.
Instead of being limited to a single camera angle,
Like a fixed perspective.
EnerVerse generates simulations from multiple viewpoints.
At the same time.
Simultaneously.
Wow.
Imagine having a bird's eye view of a room,
Okay.
combined with close-ups on objects,
Got it.
all being simulated at the same time.
So it's like giving the robot multiple sets of eyes.
That's a great analogy.
like a spider.
Exactly.
This multi-view approach helps the robot get a much more complete understanding of the environment
Yes.
and predict how its actions will affect the objects around it.
It can really start to understand its place in the world.
Okay, that makes sense. But training an AI to do all this must require mountains of data.
It does. It's a data-hungry process.
How do they even manage that?
Well, this is where EnerVerse gets even more impressive.
Okay.
It actually uses a technique called 4D Gaussian Splatting to create its own training data.
Hold on, wait. The robot is creating its own training data?
It is.
So it's basically directing its own learning process.
It's like a robot building its own film set and then using that set to practice different scenarios.
Wow.
This allows EnerVerse to generate a huge amount of diverse training data,
That's amazing.
which helps it learn much faster and become more adaptable.
So it's learning by doing.
Exactly.
And this leads to some pretty exciting real-world possibilities.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, let's dive into those.
Let's do it.
You mentioned self-driving cars earlier.
I did.
How could EnerVerse impact that?
Imagine a self-driving car approaching a busy intersection.
Okay,
With EnerVerse, it wouldn't just react to what it sees at that moment.
right. It needs to think ahead.
It could actually simulate dozens of potential scenarios.
Right.
Like, what if a pedestrian suddenly runs into the road?
That's a scary thought.
Or what if the car in front slams on its brakes?
Yeah, those are real possibilities.
By playing out these what-if scenarios in its virtual world,
Okay.
the car could choose the safest course of action,
And avoid an accident?
potentially preventing accidents before they happen.
So it's not just about reacting faster. It's about being prepared for the unexpected.
Exactly.
And what about robots in the home?
That's another area where EnerVerse could be a game changer.
Okay. In what way?
Think of a robot that can not only tidy up your house,
That's already pretty impressive.
but also anticipate your needs.
Like a mind reader.
It could learn your daily routines, predict what you'll need before you even ask,
Wow.
and even help you with complex tasks like cooking or taking care of a family member.
Like a real helper.
It would be like having a truly intelligent and helpful partner in your home.
This is incredible stuff.
It is.
But what about some of the more immediate practical uses?
Yeah, good question.
Where is EnerVerse already being put to the test?
Researchers have been running experiments with robots called agibots
Agibots.
in industrial settings.
Okay, so not in homes yet.
Not yet, but these agibots are tackling tasks like sorting objects into precise locations.
Like in a warehouse?
Exactly. And manipulating transparent objects.
That sounds tricky.
It is. And get this,
Wow.
they're even working with a foam work table,
Oh.
which makes things extra tricky because the robot needs to distinguish between the foam and the objects it's manipulating.
So it's like finding a white button on a white shirt.
It is a real test of its perception skills.
So EnerVerse is essentially helping the robot see better.
In a way, yes. EnerVerse allows the robot to simulate what it would see from different angles.
Even if its camera can't physically move,
Exactly.
this gives it a much better understanding of the objects and their surroundings.
Much better.
So it's not just about predicting movements, it's also about understanding the subtle details of the environment.
That's
Okay, and then there's the task involving transparent objects.
right.
You know how tricky it is to judge the distance or shape of something if you can see through it?
It can be really difficult.
Well, robots have the same problem.
They do.
It's like trying to grab a glass of water without spilling it.
Exactly.
You have to be so careful.
EnerVerse helps the robot overcome this challenge by simulating how light interacts with the transparent object.
From different angles.
This allows it to build a more accurate 3D model of the object, even if it's partially see-through.
It's like giving the robot X-ray vision.
That's a great way to put it.
And what's really exciting is that these Agibot experiments aren't just one-off demonstrations.
Yeah, they're not.
They're specifically designed to test EnerVerse against something called the Libero benchmark.
That's right.
Okay, tell me more about this benchmark. What is it exactly?
Libero is a set of standardized tasks
Okay.
designed to evaluate the capabilities of different robotic learning systems.
So it's a test.
It includes a range of challenges, from simple pick-and-place tasks to more complex multi-step operations.
So it's an obstacle course for robots.
Exactly, designed to push their limits.
And there's a particular category within Libero called Libero Long.
Right?
These are the tasks that really put EnerVerse to the test.
That's right.
What makes these Libero Long tasks so special?
They involve a longer sequence of actions
Okay.
and require the robot to plan ahead.
Kind of like a chess player, thinking several moves ahead.
Exactly.
Wow.
Imagine a robot trying to make a cup of tea.
Okay, I can imagine that.
It needs to not only perform each step correctly, but also do them in the right order.
That's a lot to keep track of.
It is, and this is where EnerVerse truly shines.
Okay.
It excels at these longer range tasks, outperforming other cutting-edge systems.
Really?
Especially when it comes to adapting to unexpected changes or obstacles.
That's remarkable.
It is.
It's almost as though these robots are starting to develop a sense of strategy.
That's a really interesting observation.
It's kind of mind-blowing.
And it speaks to a key aspect of EnerVerse, the ability to prioritize information.
Right, because if you're thinking ahead, you have to know what's important.
Exactly.
The research paper talks about a sparse memory mechanism.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
Think of it this way. When you're reading a book, you don't memorize every single word.
You do crazy.
You focus on the key points, the main ideas.
The big picture.
That's what EnerVerse does. Instead of trying to remember everything it sees, it learns to identify and store only the most important pieces of information.
So it's learning to separate the signal from the noise.
Exactly.
And how does it know it's important? Is that something programmed in?
That's the beauty of it. It figures that out on its own.
Really?
Through the training process, EnerVerse learns which details are crucial for completing the task.
And which ones it can ignore.
Exactly.
That's a huge step towards more efficient and adaptable learning.
It is a big step.
But all this processing power must come at a cost, right?
There is a computational cost.
How are they addressing the computational demands of EnerVerse?
Well, remember that data flywheel we discussed earlier?
The one where the robot creates its own training data.
Exactly. It's not just about efficiency. It's also about generating the vast amounts of data needed to train these systems.
Right, because data is the fuel for AI.
By creating its own training data through simulation and 4D Gaussian splatting,
Yeah.
EnerVerse can actually accelerate the learning process,
And it doesn't need to rely on as much real-world data.
which can be expensive and time-consuming to collect.
So it's like the robot is bootstrapping its own education.
That's a fantastic analogy.
It's creating its own textbooks and study guides.
It really highlights the elegance of this approach.
It's a self-sustaining learning loop.
It is.
This is truly groundbreaking research.
It is.
But I want to circle back to something you touched on earlier.
Okay.
The idea that these robots are starting to show signs of strategy and anticipation.
It is pretty amazing.
It's a bit mind-boggling, isn't it?
It is.
It challenges our very definition of intelligence.
Right. We tend to think of intelligence as something uniquely human.
But as we develop systems like EnerVerse, we're starting to blur those lines.
We are.
We're creating machines that can not only learn,
But also reason and plan.
which opens up a whole new world of possibility.
A whole new world.
It's almost like we're witnessing the birth of a new kind of intelligence. A silicon-based intelligence that operates on principles we're only just beginning to understand.
That's a profound thought.
And that brings us to the biggest question of all.
What's that?
What does this mean for the future?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
And to answer that, we need to take a deeper dive into some of the specific applications and implications of this technology.
Let's do it. Welcome back. We just scratched the surface of what EnerVerse can do.
I know, right? There's so much to unpack here.
Now let's dive into the specifics of how this robot imagination is playing out in real-world tests.
Before the break, you mentioned these Agibot robots tackling some really unique tasks.
Right.
Let's unpack that.
Right.
You mentioned a foam work table.
Yeah.
What makes that so challenging?
Well, imagine trying to pick up a white chess piece from a whiteboard.
Okay.
Your eyes might have a hard time distinguishing the two.
Yeah, that would be tough.
That's the challenge with the foam work table.
I see.
It's visually similar to the blocks the robot has to manipulate.
So EnerVerse is essentially helping the robot see better.
In a way, yes.
How?
EnerVerse allows the robot to simulate what it would see from different angles.
Okay.
Even if it can't physically move its camera.
Got it.
This gives it a much better understanding of the objects and their surroundings.
So it's not just about predicting movements. It's also about understanding the subtle details of the environment.
Exactly.
And then there's the task involving transparent objects.
Right.
You know how tricky it is to judge the distance or shape of something if you can see through it?
It can be really tricky.
Well, robots have the same problem.
They do. It's a challenge for any vision system.
It's like trying to grab a glass of water without spilling it.
Exactly. You have to be so careful.
You don't want to misjudge the angle.
EnerVerse helps the robot overcome this challenge by simulating how light interacts with the transparent object from different angles.
Okay.
This allows it to build a more accurate 3D model of the object, even if it's partially see-through.
It's like giving the robot X-ray vision.
That's a great way to put it.
And what's really exciting is that these Agibot experiments aren't just one-off demonstrations.
No, they're not. They're part of a larger research effort.
They're specifically designed to test EnerVerse against something called the Libero benchmark.
That's right.
Okay, tell me more about this benchmark. What is it exactly?
Libero is a set of standardized tasks designed to evaluate the capabilities of different robotic learning systems.
So it's like a standardized test.
It includes a range of challenges.
Like what kind of challenges?
From simple pick-and-place tasks
Gotcha.
to more complex multi-step operations.
So it's like an obstacle course for robots designed to push their limits.
Exactly.
And there's a particular category within Libero called Libero Long.
Right.
These are the tasks that really put EnerVerse to the test.
That's right. These are the really challenging ones.
What makes these Libero Long tasks so special?
They involve a longer sequence of actions and require the robot to plan ahead, kind of like a chess player thinking several moves ahead.
Wow, that's impressive.
Imagine a robot trying to make a cup of tea.
Oh, okay, I can imagine that.
It needs to not only perform each step correctly, but also do them in the right order.
That's a lot to keep track of.
It is, and this is where EnerVerse truly shines. It excels at these longer range tasks.
Really?
Outperforming other cutting-edge systems, especially when it comes to adapting to unexpected changes or obstacles.
That's remarkable. It's almost as though these robots are starting to develop a sense of strategy.
That's a really interesting observation, and it speaks to a key aspect of EnerVerse.
What's that?
The ability to prioritize information.
Right, because if you're thinking ahead, you have to know what's important.
Exactly.
The research paper talks about a sparse memory mechanism.
Yeah, that's a key part of how EnerVerse works.
What's that all about?
Think of it this way. When you're reading a book, you don't memorize every single word.
Mm-hmm.
You focus on the key points, the main ideas.
Right, you get the gist of it.
That's what EnerVerse does.
Okay.
Instead of trying to remember everything it sees,
Which would be impossible.
it learns to identify and store only the most important pieces of information.
So it's learning to separate the signal from the noise?
Exactly.
And how does it know what's important? Is that something programmed in?
That's the beauty of it. It figures that out on its own. Through the training process, EnerVerse learns which details are crucial for completing the task.
And which ones it can safely ignore.
Exactly.
That's a huge step towards more efficient and adaptable learning.
It is. It's a big step.
But all this processing power must come at a cost, right?
Yeah.
How are they addressing the computational demands of EnerVerse?
Well, remember that data flywheel we discussed earlier?
The one where the robot creates its own training data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not just about efficiency. It's also about generating the vast amounts of data needed to train these systems.
Right, because data is the fuel for AI.
By creating its own training data through simulation and 4D Gaussian Splatting, EnerVerse can actually accelerate the learning process.
And it doesn't need to rely on as much real-world data.
Which can be expensive and time-consuming to collect.
So it's like the robot is bootstrapping its own education. It's creating its own textbooks and study guides.
That's a fantastic analogy. It really highlights the elegance of this approach. It's a self-sustaining learning loop.
This is truly groundbreaking research.
It is. It's pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible with AI.
But I wanted to circle back to something you touched on earlier.
Okay.
The idea that these robots are starting to show signs of strategy and anticipation.
It is pretty amazing to see.
It's a bit mind-boggling, isn't it?
It is. It challenges our very definition of intelligence.
Right. We tend to think of intelligence as something uniquely human. But as we develop systems like EnerVerse, we're starting to blur those lines.
We're seeing machines exhibit behaviors that we once thought were exclusive to humans.
We're creating machines that can not only learn, but also reason and plan.
Which opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
It's almost like we're witnessing the birth of a new kind of intelligence.
A silicon-based intelligence that operates on principles we're only just beginning to understand.
And that brings us to the biggest question of all. What does this mean for the future?
What does it all mean?
We've explored the how. Now let's talk about the why.
Okay.
Why should all of this matter to our listener, to the everyday person?
That's the question that keeps me up at night. Because the truth is, EnerVerse isn't just a cool tech demo.
It's more than that.
It's a glimpse into a future that's closer than we think. And it's a future where robots are not just tools, but partners.
Partners. That's a bold statement.
Think about it. Imagine robots that can collaborate with us on complex tasks. Robots that can anticipate our needs. Robots that can help us solve problems we haven't even thought of yet.
That's a lot of potential.
That's the potential we're talking about here.
It's a future that's both exciting and a little bit daunting. Are we ready for it?
That's a question we all need to be asking ourselves. And it's a question that goes beyond the technical realm.
In what way?
It's a question about ethics, about society, about the very nature of what it means to be human in a world where machines are becoming increasingly intelligent.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
It's great to be back.
We've been unpacking this groundbreaking research on EnerVerse.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
And honestly, it's been quite the thought-provoking journey.
It really has. We've gone from the technical nitty-gritty to some pretty profound questions about the future of intelligence and what it means for us humans.
Exactly. And before the break, we were starting to touch on this idea of robots as partners.
Right, not just tools.
I think that's a really important distinction.
Absolutely. It's a fundamental shift in perspective.
In what way?
For centuries, we viewed machines as extensions of our physical capabilities.
Tools to help us do things.
Tools to help us lift heavier objects or travel faster.
Right, the physical stuff.
But now, with AI systems like EnerVerse,
Yeah.
we're creating machines that can extend our cognitive abilities.
It's like we're giving robots the ability not just to do what we tell them, but to think for themselves.
To solve problems in ways we might never have imagined.
And that's both incredibly exciting and a little bit unsettling, isn't it?
It is. There's no doubt about that.
It raises all sorts of questions about control, about responsibility, about the very nature of work and creativity.
Big questions.
It does make you wonder, in a world where robots can anticipate our needs and solve complex problems,
Right.
what will be left for us to do?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Will we all become philosophers and artists, pondering the meaning of life while robots handle the practicalities?
That's a fascinating question, and I don't think there's a simple answer.
I guess not.
But I do believe that this technology has the potential to free us from the drudgery of repetitive tasks,
Okay, yeah.
to allow us to focus on the things that make us uniquely human.
Like what?
Our creativity, our empathy, our ability to connect with one another on a deeper level.
So instead of fearing the rise of the robots,
Right.
maybe we should see it as an opportunity to redefine what it means to be human.
To explore new frontiers of creativity and collaboration.
I like that.
And that brings us back to the broader implications of EnerVerse.
Okay.
It's not just about robots.
What else is it about?
It's about the potential to simulate and understand complex systems in ways we never could before.
You mentioned climate change and disease outbreaks earlier.
I did.
How could EnerVerse be applied in those fields?
Imagine using EnerVerse to create incredibly detailed simulations of our planet's climate.
Wow, that would be huge.
Factoring in all the variables that influence weather patterns and long-term trends.
It's a lot of data.
We could test different scenarios, explore the potential impact of various policy decisions,
So it's like a giant what-if machine.
and gain a much deeper understanding of how to mitigate the effects of climate change.
So it's not just about predicting the future. It's about giving us the tools to shape the future.
To make more informed decisions about the challenges facing our planet.
Precisely. And the same principle applies to disease outbreaks.
Absolutely.
We could use EnerVerse to simulate the spread of a virus, to understand how different interventions might impact its trajectory.
And to develop more effective strategies for containment and treatment.
It's like having a crystal ball for public health, allowing us to anticipate and respond to threats in a more proactive and effective way.
Exactly. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The potential applications of this technology are truly vast spanning fields, from astrophysics to economics to urban planning.
This is all incredibly exciting, but I have to admit it's also a bit overwhelming.
I understand.
Where do we even begin to wrap our heads around all of this?
It's a lot to take in.
What can our listener do to prepare for this future that seems to be rapidly approaching?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed, to be curious, to keep asking questions.
Right, because knowledge is power.
The future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we create collectively.
So instead of being passive bystanders,
Yeah.
we need to be active participants in shaping the future we want to see.
Exactly. We need to engage in conversations about the ethical implications of these technologies to ensure that they are used responsibly and for the benefit of all humankind.
Well said. And I encourage everyone listening to explore the resources available online, to learn more about AI and robotics, and to share their thoughts and ideas with others.
It's a conversation we all need to be having.
This isn't just a technical challenge, it's a societal challenge. And it's a challenge that we can only overcome by working together.
I agree.
This has been an incredible deep dive. We started with a research paper about robots that can imagine the future,
It's amazing to think about.
and ended up talking about the future of humanity itself.
It's all connected.
It's mind-blowing to think about the possibilities that lie ahead.
It truly is. And while there are certainly challenges to address, I'm ultimately optimistic about the future.
I like your optimism.
I believe that with careful planning and thoughtful collaboration, we can harness the power of AI to create a world that is more prosperous, more equitable, and more inspiring than ever before.
That's a hopeful note to end on, and I want to thank you for sharing your insights with us today.
It's been a pleasure.
It's clear that EnerVerse is just the beginning. The ability to simulate the future opens up a universe of possibilities, and it's up to all of us to explore those possibilities with wisdom and courage. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep diving deep.